everyone, and welcome back to my podcast, which is in collaboration with the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Social Work. I'm your host, Feben Teka, and today's episode will be on my critical self-reflection, where I answer some questions. So let's start off with the first one, which is my positionality. So when I think about my positionality, I see it as a mix of different parts of my identity that shape how I experience the world and how I'll show up as a future social worker. I'm an Ethiopian woman who immigrated to Winnipeg when I was really young, and I grew up in a lower middle class household. So from early on, I was moving through spaces where I was racialized, but also trying to figure out class, belonging, and identity, which if you didn't know, they all overlap. So I think intersectionality is a really important term to bring up in conversations like these because they intertwine with racism. A lot of my early experiences with racism, they were pretty direct, like being called names, but they were also more subtle things, like I was always being aware of how I might be perceived in different spaces, or feeling like I had to adjust how I speak or present myself depending on who I'm around. And because of that, I've come to understand that racism doesn't show up on its own. It connects with other things like class, immigration, and gender. Intersectionality, it isn't just a concept for me. It's something that I can actually see in how different parts of my identity get read together in different situations. And in terms of social work, I think this makes me more aware that people's experiences are layered. It's never just about one thing. But I also have to remind myself that having my own experiences with racism doesn't automatically mean that I understand someone else's. There are differences within those shared experiences as well. And I think my positionality affects how I listen and how I show up in conversations. I tend to pay attention not just to what people are saying, but what might be underneath it or what they're fully not saying. And I just tend to overanalyze that because microaggressions, if you know, you know. That comes from my own experience of navigating different spaces and deciding what parts of myself feel safe to share. So that's my experiences on positionality and how I view that. So moving on to the next question about learning shifts and what 3 things throughout the semester have impacted that. So looking back on this course, I don't think my understanding of racism changed in a dramatic before and after way, but it definitely got more layered. I started noticing how often things that seem simple on the surface actually connect to bigger systems, power dynamics, and decisions about who gets to be seen or heard. And one moment in the semester that really stuck out to me was our class conversation about Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance. It, like, to the blind eye, it might seem like just a pop culture moment, but the discussion really emphasized just how much complex and deep it was. It wasn't just about representation in the sense of, oh, it's good to see someone Latino on that stage, but more about what it means when certain identities are allowed into mainstream spaces while other political realities are still happening alongside that. We talked about what's going on in the US with ICE and anti-immigration, and that really shifted how I thought about it. It made me think about how representation, can exist at the same time as exclusion, and how visibility doesn't automatically mean safety or equity. And that was important for me because it pushed me to stop thinking about representation as something automatically positive and instead look at what the context it sits in. Another learning shift for me, the discussion posts throughout the semester, they also changed how I engaged with the material. At first, I kind of saw them as just another assignment, but over time, they actually forced me to slow down and really process what I was reading. When it was my turn to lead, I had to break down a reading and think about what actually matters in it and not just summarize it and end it with a question. Made me think about how to push conversations further instead of just closing it off. The extension posts were also useful because they made me look outside of the course content and connect it to other sources, which made the topics feel more real and less contained in a classroom setting. Even responding to classmates shifted how I think, because I couldn't just say I agree or, oh, you made a really good discussion post. I had to actually engage with what they were saying and respond to it in a more thoughtful way. And that definitely changed how I think about discussion posts overall. It was less as participation and more as dialogue. The third thing is the creative projects and the gallery share we had earlier in the semester. They were a big part of that learning experience for me. Seeing everyone's work laid out together made it really obvious how different people's experiences in the course were and how those experiences connect to their positionality. Some projects were coming from a place of recognizing privilege, others were sharing something in between or about really direct experiences of racism or barriers. And my own project, which was called Beyond the Margins, fit into that by using a newspaper format to think about who gets centered and who gets pushed to the background. For me, that idea came from noticing how often marginalized stories are treated as secondary or only brought in as examples instead of being centered on their own. And writing it out really helped me connect my own experiences as an Ethiopian woman. And overall, I found that most valuable in this course because it helped push me to connect theory with lived experience in a more intentional way. So, what does anti-racist practice look like for me? For me, anti-racist practice is less about having the right type of awareness and more about what I actually do with that awareness in everyday moments. It looks like slowing myself down enough to notice when something feels off, like when certain stories are being centered and others are being pushed to the side, like I highlighted in my creative project. And it also means not treating racism as something that's abstract, but more about paying attention to how it shows up in real conversations, systems, and even in the way people are spoken about. I think that the stories I carry with me also matter here. Moments from childhood where racism showed up in a really casual but lasting way reminds me that harm doesn't always announce itself. And I try to be attentive to the quieter things too. And in terms of skills, I think it's things like listening without rushing to respond, asking better questions, and being okay sitting in discomfort instead of immediately trying to fix or smooth things over. It's also being willing to reflect on my own positions in a situation, especially when power is involved. And this makes me think about something one of my instructors in my other classes told me, which was, get uncomfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that pretty much sums it up. So, commitments to be an anti-racist social worker moving forward. Moving forward, my commitment to anti-racist social work is to keep this work active in how I think, listen, and respond in practice. I want to stay aware of how my positionality shapes my assumptions, continue learning from lived experiences beyond my own, and not fall into treating anti-racism as something that I already know. I'm also committing to speaking up when something feels off, even when it's uncomfortable, and making sure I'm not staying neutral in situations where harm or exclusion is present. For me, this is ongoing work, and it forever will be, and I'm committed to showing up to it consistently, not just in theory, but also in action. Thank you for listening to my episode, and see you next time.